Today's backyard conversation is going to be about cold weather survival training, part of SEAL qualification training. Hope you guys enjoy it. Welcome back to Backyard Conversations. Guys, if you haven't been watching these shows, what Backyard Conversations is all about is this binder right here. We're going through this entire binder. This is my I Love Me binder. And in here are all of the certificates that I earned throughout my career in the SEAL teams. So I go through each one of these and talk about them in great detail and tell you some stories that I have never really told before. Try to remember them as best we can. So there are multiple of these. If you are enjoying them, subscribe to the channel. We'd appreciate it. Today, we're going to talk about another one of my favorites, all right? This is basic cold weather maritime survival training held in Kodiak, Alaska. This course is about 2 months long, and it is held in a place called Kodiak, Alaska. This course of instruction taught me so much, and most of what I teach you guys, if you've been out to the basic course or you've trained with us in the wilderness, I learned all those skills that I pass along to you guys in this course right here. So, unbelievable. Freaking tons and tons of stories from this course of instruction. Now, this was in SEAL qualification training, so we weren't SEALs yet. We were still in the training pipeline. We went out to Kodiak, flew out to Kodiak in a C-130, low and slow in the middle of the winter time. I think it was January when we did our mission out here in Kodiak. And I'll never forget almost freezing to death on that plane ride, that C-130 ride out to Alaska. We finally got there, and I had no clue what I was getting myself into. I had spent my childhood in the woods and hunting and doing stuff like that, but man, this was a whole nother level. Let me tell you, the cold weather, wintertime in Alaska, it complicates everything. The entire time I was in Kodiak, it either rained, sleeted, or snowed. And usually that just depended on how high up I was, what elevation we were at when we were out in the backcountry. The first morning I woke up in Kodiak, nobody had told me that in the wintertime in Alaska, it stays dark most of the day. And I'll never forget coming out of my little tent that we were staying in, and it was probably 10 or 11 in the morning, and it was still dark outside. I was like, what the heck is going on here? Finally, one of my classmates that was smarter than me told me, hey, it stays dark most of the day. Freaked me out right off the bat. This is a wild, wild place. Man, we got to do some amazing stuff out in Kodiak and learn some amazing skills. One thing I'll never forget during this course of instruction, it actually had a lot of survival components to it. So a lot of the stuff that we learned in Kodiak really applied to SEER training, which you guys have watched the SEER training conversation here on the channel. But here we were learning survival techniques in the wilderness, all right, in that cold weather environment. So we got to learn how to forage for food in tide pools right there on the coast of Kodiak. And if you've never tried to eat a live octopus, you're really missing out. A tide pool is a great place to forage and find some good food. While we were up in Kodiak, we would go out on long-range patrols, missions, heavy land navigation in full gear. The packs we used, man, were just unbelievably heavy, and everybody uses this ultralight backpacking gear now. No, we didn't have that in the military. The gear we used in the SEAL teams was usually about 3 to 5 years behind whatever technology we have out here in the civilian world. So lugging that pack all over those mountains in that freezing cold environment was absolutely brutal, man. We encountered everything out there from, again, rain, sleet, snow, and in some cases, absolute blizzards. I'll never forget being out on a long-range patrol and the blizzard, the winter storm, whatever you call it, came down on me and the guys I was out there with, and it got so rough that within about 10 minutes, we could not see anything. It was total whiteout conditions. We ducked in under a spruce tree and we spent the night under the boughs of that spruce tree to stay out of that storm. It was the only place where the ground was not covered in snow. That was one of the coolest nights that I've ever spent out in the woods, was underneath that spruce tree in the middle of an Alaskan blizzard. It was unbelievable. Part of the survival training that we did out here at Kodiak was we did an evolution where they sent us out into the backcountry with only our survival gear. Very, very minimal gear, all right? Maybe 1 day worth of food, some fire starting equipment, a little bit of 550 cord, and let's say a pocket knife, all right? So super, super minimal stuff. We had to spend a couple of nights out in the woods just utilizing what we had. So in order to stay warm at night, we had to build these structures called debris huts. A debris hut is exactly what it sounds like it is, and it takes a long time to build these things. Mine was basically an A-frame shelter that I rigged up, and I spent all day piling debris, leaves, moss, pine boughs, piling debris on the roof of this hut so that I could get the walls of the roof thick enough to provide a little bit of insulation and also to keep me dry throughout the night. Spent all day building this thing, finally got it the way I wanted it, crawled in the debris hut. I started a fire right in the entranceway to my debris hut, hoping that some of the heat from that fire was going to waft in there and insulate me and keep me at least semi-warm throughout the night. Got my fire going good, raging. I laid down on the floor to try to get a little rest. And about the time I got asleep, I woke up and realized that fire had actually caught my debris hut on fire. And within the matter of less than a minute, it burned to the ground. Luckily, I was able to get out of that thing quick enough so that it didn't burn me up with it. And I pretty much gave up on life after that. I spent that night out laying on the cold ground with zero shelter. Probably the coldest night I have ever spent. The most miserable night I have ever spent in the wilderness was when I burned that debris hut down. Man, we had a lot of funny things happen out there also. As a class, we all decided to dye our mustaches black. I have no clue why we did that, but everybody there that could grow a mustache, we dyed them black, and we looked like freaking goofballs the entire time we were in Kodiak. I have a good friend that I went through all of training with, and we were out on a nighttime patrol one night here in Kodiak. We didn't have night vision at this point. It was all headlamps. So when it got dark, me and the rest of the guys, we all turned our headlamps on because we were making movement across extremely difficult terrain. But we had this one guy, good friend of mine, and he was angry about us having our headlamps on because he said we were ruining his night vision. So after about 10 minutes of hearing him gripe and complain about us wearing our headlamps, we finally, just to get him to shut up, turned our headlamps off, and we said, okay, we're gonna let him try to walk around in the dark. And he walked about another 100 meters, and we're kind of watching him out there in front of us, right? And all of a sudden he disappears. It's like he just disappeared. And we could just see his silhouette, you know, and then he's just gone. And we're like, what in the world just happened? So we all turn our headlamps back on, and we walk over there to where he disappeared at, and he had walked off an embankment, and he was laying at the bottom of about a 15-foot deep embankment. And I'm gonna go ahead and tell you, we got a good laugh out of that one, man. Luckily, he didn't get hurt. Another huge thing I remember during this block of training is the Winter Olympics were on. And every time we would come back in off of a long-range patrol out in the backcountry, We would come back in and we would rejock our gear and let stuff dry out for about a day before we would go back out into the wilderness. And we would spend hours watching curdling on the Winter Olympics. I still love curdling to this day. I think it's an epic, epic sport. Probably the best part of all of the Winter Olympics. Getting toward the end of this training, we went out on our FTX, final training exercise. Now, this final training exercise incorporates everything that we had learned up to this point, all the survival techniques, land navigation, and we were moving across a massive piece of terrain, essentially over the course of about 6 days. And we get to the very end of this thing, and we are beat, we're tired, we're hungry, we're cold, we've been wet for days, and we can see our extract point down in the valley from the high ground, and we start to move toward that extract, and we think, oh, finally, this training's over. Finally, we get to go back to the, to the compound and warm up and dry ourselves out and dry our gear out. We get down into the valley where we think we're getting picked up, and we can actually see the vehicles, the trucks that are there to pick us up on the roadway. And so we're making our way up to the trucks, and the instructors call us over to their location. They're standing on the edge or the banks of a frozen river. They call us all down there, and they proceed to break holes in the ice in the river there. And as they're breaking the holes in the ice, they tell us, hey guys, drop your rucksacks. We're about to get in this frozen river. They put us in that frozen river for 5 minutes. It is the coldest water that I have ever felt in my entire life. They make you get in, go all the way under, come back up, and you're just sitting there for 5 minutes. Now, when you get out, obviously you're hypothermic. Your hands are freezing cold. I mean, the water was so cold, every joint in your body ached. I mean, it was very, very painful. You get out and you gotta rewarm yourself. You really have no choice. You just have to do it. And it's teaching you how to do that in case you fall in a frozen river out on an actual mission. So you wanna talk about difficult. Try to set your tent up when your hands are frozen. Try to manipulate tent poles when your hands are frozen. All the while, you know you're on the clock, because hypothermia is getting worse and worse and worse. So it's not like you can just take your time and work through it. Man, that was a tough, tough evolution. Definitely the coldest water I've ever felt. And the most, trying to get your brain to work and go through the proper steps to rewarm yourself when you're that cold and that exhausted was a huge, huge test of our abilities right there at the end of that training. I will never forget Kodiak, Alaska, and I am blessed to be able to use so many of the techniques that we learned during this course of instruction now in my everyday life and my adventures out in the backcountry. So if you guys, any of you guys listening, if you're getting ready to go through SQT, you should really, really be looking forward to Kodiak, because you're going to get a ton of good stories that come out of this training block. Super brutal environment. I hope you guys enjoyed this part of Backyard Conversations. I don't know that very many people ever talk in detail about this course of instruction, but again, it was one of my favorites. So if you guys did, if you enjoyed hearing the stories, subscribe to the channel, keep tuning in. We're going to keep feeding you guys the best content that we possibly can, as long as you keep tuning in. Give us feedback, let us know what you get out of this. We love you guys. Nuff said.